You're live.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I see all of the folks trickling in. Happy hump day to all. I got a giggle out of Nancy there. That's my goal.
Happy hump day to you, Claudia. We're excited to be
Thank
here with
you.
you.
Oh, I'm excited to have you guys. Let's talk some
I
cybersecurity.
even put my orange on to match your colors.
Oh my gosh. You shouldn't have. We will let everyone trickle in and then we'll jump right into it. I know everybody's super excited to hear from you guys.
To be here.
I know it's an age-old question, but how's the weather where you're at, Nancy? Are you finally warming up? Are you doing okay?
And I think we're getting into summer now. Over the weekend, we had a lot of rain. My garden definitely got its fair share of moisture. So now we're ready to roll.
We've been
But
having
how
the
are you
opposite
all?
problem. My garden is drowning in spring and now early summer rain. My tomatoes are abysmal, but hopefully it'll get a little
I know.
bit better.
I think once we
Well,
heat up, we'll start working.
right? Ooh, we'll have to exchange tips and tricks. I'll give
Great.
everybody 1 minute and then we can dive on in.
Great.
Thank you all for joining us to Claudia and Nancy's gardening tips. I'm just kidding. We'll talk managed IT and cybersecurity compliance today. I'm your host, Claudia. All right, guys, it is 3 after, which tends to be the best time to start, so let's dive on into it. Welcome to Visory's Managed IT, Cybersecurity, and Compliance webinar. We've got a great host of guests today. I'm really excited to be talking to them. I am your host, Claudia. I'm the Inside Sales Account Manager for all things RIA at Visory. I'm happy to be here and going in depth. I've also brought Tammy from our team. Tammy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be joining today. I'm Tammy Jutras, the Director of Cybersecurity Services here at Visory. I am in charge of our SOC and all things compliance and cybersecurity. So going to be a fun webinar today. Happy to join you.
Thanks so much, Tammy. And we have a really awesome team today, guys. We've brought on True West, Nancy, and Aaron. A little bit of background about them. Aaron is an IT infrastructure and cybersecurity specialist. He's got a deep experience leading technology transformation efforts within the financial services sector. So right what we're talking about. In recent years, he's been working with RIAs and FMOs to modernize disjointed and outdated IT environments, bring them back into alignment with regulatory expectations and operational best practices. So he's definitely somebody what we want to listen to. His work focuses on building secure, well-governed systems that support business growth, reduce risk, and hold up under regulatory and audit security or scrutiny. Excuse me. Aaron, say hi to the people if you would.
Hello, everyone. Thank you guys for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks so much for joining. We also have Nancy. Nancy is an avid gardener. I'm just kidding. In 2022, Nancy co-founded True West. So True West is actually a high-touch boutique compliance consulting firm. She brings with her over 20 years of financial industry experience focused on regulatory compliance for RIAs. With service first approach, Nancy helps clients to develop efficient compliance programs and foster a strong culture of compliance. So we're really excited to have her, the founder of True West. Nancy, if you'll say hello to everyone.
Hello. Thanks, Claudia. Thanks for having us join. And Tam, it's great to be a part of this.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in, guys. Beautiful. So RIA Compliance Essentials. Tammy, take it away for me.
I think this was going to be Nancy's slide.
Oh, apologies. Nancy,
Actually-
take it away from me. My notes were wrong.
No, that's
All right.
fine. So, so at True West, we really do focus on registering firms, so setting up firms from the beginning. So, SEC registration, a handful of state registrations, and then we also take on a lot of existing firms that come to us that just need extra support, extra handholding. A lot of the most recent firms that we've been seeing do have maybe they've been through an ugly exam, maybe they've been through just a rocky start from their current consultant. So we're very focused on having engaging conversations with SEC registered firms. So I think a lot of the mindset is you can maybe just throw some money at it and outsource some of the operations or the third-party outsourcing. But our motto at True West is really just to have those conversations with compliance. We want to set them up with success, not only with the compliance program, but having active conversations with maybe the HR department, maybe with marketing, and having some extra training on what marketing prohibitions look like. So we're developing good, proper content. It also carries over to some of the onboarding and offboarding in HR. And some of the trading oversight. But what we've been seeing recently is a lot of interactions with IT. And so maybe it's bringing on a new hire, maybe it's bringing on, or actually a departed IAR. What do those procedures look like? And I think a lot of times we're at the conversation table, and a lot of firms just are not aware of their current policies. So it's very important to have conversations up front. So we set up our firms right from the beginning. I think leading into what RAs must know, I would say a lot of the things that we're educating our clients with are just the rules. What does the Advisors Act say when it comes to cybersecurity? So there's a couple of rules I might just throw at you from the beginning. Rule 20647 is just what does your compliance program look like, and what is it like to assess the risks of the firm? And specifically with today, we're going to talk a lot about just cybersecurity risks. And so along the same lines, we've got Reg SP, and just what are the processes and procedures around protecting our clients' information and safeguarding that information. And then Reg SD, just being aware of some of the red flags and the rules that help us educate clients on identifying identity theft with our current clients. So those are some of the rules, and there's also some talk about the upcoming Reg SP amendments to the rule. I might just quote the SEC acting director, exams director, just recently gave a talk last week. It's interesting. I might just do a little excerpt from his speech. It says, but the threat landscape has significantly changed in the last 25 years. In 2000, the vast majority of mobile phones were cellular phones, like the Nokia brick phone or flip phone. Today, about 9 in 10 US adults own a smartphone. In 2000, you generally initiated a stock trade by either calling your broker or through the internet using a dial-up modem. Today, over 100 million people use investment apps. This includes 78% of the investors aged 18 to 34. In 2000, cyber attacks were just starting to become a growing threat in the US. Today, Microsoft reports that customers face 600 million cyber attacks on a daily basis. The FBI reported in 2023 that its Internet Crime Complaint Center received over 880,000 complaints with potential losses exceeding 12.5 billion. I think that just sets the framework of this new administration and where they probably will focus their attention on. And so we know that we need to have these conversations early on with clients and making sure that we have a proactive compliance program. And that's what we usually do at True West, work on that proactive instead of that reactive nature. Aaron, I might have you just talk a little bit about building a scalable foundation and some of the most common vulnerabilities that we've seen with our recent clients.
Sure. I think, a struggle that a lot of advisors have that we see repeated over and over is as you're building your business, IT sometimes is a neglected aspect of what that foundation for your business looks like. And then you maybe grow your business and get to a point where you're starting to think a little bit more about what your regulatory alignment looks like. And then you learn a lot about the IT things that maybe you weren't giving consideration to early on. And so that foundation of your business is not just the sales and the marketing of the financial services that you're trying to provide to your clients, but it's also that really important IT foundation to help keep your business safe, help keep your data secure, and to help you just operationally, scale and grow your business to the degree that you're interested in doing.
Great.
You want to talk a little about common vulnerabilities, okay, we're moving on.
All right, Aaron, go for it.
Yeah, I think Tammy and I can probably talk a little bit here about some of the common vulnerabilities. We've seen the landscape of IT shift pretty radically since the pandemic, where now we have people working really anywhere and everywhere. We had a very office-focused, data center-focused IT landscape pre-pandemic, and now we have to provide security services all over the place for any type of device, anywhere, anytime. And that is probably the biggest vulnerability that we face, is just how do we maintain control of that type of landscape where anything can really be anywhere, from a device perspective and from a data perspective. And then we'll get into this a little bit later in our talk today, but one of the other really big vulnerabilities that is represented in advisory firms and really any office in doing business is just your employees and your staff, and the lack of awareness, the lack of training, particularly around email phishing and social engineering types of attacks and threats. They are probably the most vulnerable point of entry for potential bad things happening within the cybersecurity scope of your business. Tammy, any other thoughts on that?
Well, and Aaron, those are still the most common ways in, because they're still working, right? They're still getting in front of people, and the technology, and with AI, those campaigns have gotten so sophisticated and so real that they blend in with the work that people are doing on a daily basis. And so it's very, very easy to fall for something that looks incredibly real. So absolutely.
For the last 6 months, we've seen an uptick on emails that look and feel exactly like a firm. They have the logo. It's just a matter of just a couple little letters off and that email address. And clients believe that these emails are coming from this, their advisor. And so I think just knowing they're getting a lot more creative, and with the use of AI, it's even getting uglier.
I feel like we already have so much to talk about. So the current threat landscape, Tammy already started talking a little bit, but you blew my mind with a statistic the other day, Tammy, if you'd like to share, that keeps me up at night a bit.
Well, I was actually blown away with what Nancy was talking about, and how much things have changed in just 20 some odd years. That's just mind blowing. It really is. And yeah, so definitely, malware, this first statistic about it being undetected, right? Just in our legacy environments, maybe 10, 15, even 8 or 10 years ago, malware could hide in the landscape, for upwards of 200 days, right? And so with the improvements in detectability, software, all of the new tools that are coming out, that dwell time has really dropped considerably. Right now, we're at about between 5 and 26 days of dwell time, depending on the detection method, what tools are in place. And so you can even bring that down a little bit further if you're using some very sort of best in class response time, things like an endpoint detection and response product. You can get that down to minutes, right? So really working with that IT provider who uses the latest best in class tools is going to bring that dwell time down and really find these things that in the yesteryears used to stay hidden. And most people don't even know that they've had any type of incident or hack, because there's not an alert really that happens, right? This stuff is kind of invisible. So you're going along and you may not even notice anything suspicious, right? Your email could be compromised, But the bad actors, you know, there's no red flags, things maybe aren't bouncing, people aren't telling you that they're getting strange emails from you. So, you know, that dwell time really can do a lot of damage if that's not caught, you know, timely. And again, these common threats, like we just were talking about, you know, the phishing is still on the rise. Phishing is the #1 way to attack and get into an environment. It still works. And, you know, a lot of this uses social engineering and a lot of that kind of psychology, right? To kind of trick your mind. Our minds are lazy. We take shortcuts, right? So if they can put something in front of you that's almost perfect, doesn't have to be perfect, but your eye and your mind are just going to go, oh yeah, I recognize that logo, right? It's the same colors as Microsoft. It looks a lot like Microsoft. So your mind tells you, this is from Microsoft, it's a safe email, that sort of thing, right? So those kinds of things are going to continue to only become more real, more targeted, more believable. Ransomware, you know, hasn't gone away. Again, I think the hackers and the bad actors go where the money is, right? So whatever's working, whatever's gaining them monetary value in the current moment is what's going to become hot. And that changes, you know, from year to year, right? Sometimes ransomware is higher, sometimes the insider threats, right? They go and target employees who are already working for you, or they'll, in a larger organization, they may target you know, your IT department. We've heard in the news, you know, where foreign IT folks, not necessarily just North Korea, but there's, you know, several sort of overseas countries that would like to get IT people inside a lot of our American businesses. And so that's a way of an insider threat, right? They're a trusted IT employee. So, you know, what does that mean for your business, right? Whether it's a data breach, you know, there's reputational damage, client trust, right? All of that can take a toll. So definitely investing in that real-time detection and those triage tools really becomes essential to reduce that dwell time and mitigate that breach impact.
Yeah, and I might
Yeah.
add on to this just a little bit too, and say that, you know, what is represented here on your screen to me, you could summarize that by saying what is it they're after, and what they're after. We call it the crown jewels. It's your data, and you have a responsibility now, and the DOJ has some new rules around this too, related to knowing where your data is. Knowing what your data is, knowing where it's at all the time, and then having controls to ensure that malware, phishing, insider activities, whatever the threat may be after, that you know how to protect that data, and know how to control the access to that data. That's the most important thing that I think a lot of businesses miss. They maybe go out and they buy a great endpoint detection response tool, or they try and set up some alerting around some stuff, but they may have missed the most important places within their IT infrastructure for where they need to adjust those nerd knobs, I like to call them, to make sure that you're getting some feedback from the systems about when attacks might be actually occurring, or when a response has been initiated to try and protect your data. If you don't know where your data is, then how do you know where to protect? So we've got to lock the front door of our house and the back door of the house too. But if you didn't know you had a back door, you might have missed it, right?
Do you want me to touch on why this matters, Claudia?
Please. Yeah, definitely.
Great. I think just knowing that our ADV is public information, you'll see websites, URLs, everything there on our regulatory filings, which we have an obligation to keep up to date and current. So first, firms, RIAs, information is just out there for everyone. And knowing that you have financial in your name, wealth in your name, all of those are just targets for any cyber criminal to go after and try to pinpoint. I think they also look at, you know, how big is your firm? I think they know that smaller firms are more vulnerable to this and maybe don't have all the protocols and the policies in place. They don't have resources dedicated to that. So I think there's some vulnerability for mid to small firms, or small to mid firms. where maybe there hasn't been that much attention put forth, creating a nice cyber program. Anything else to touch on that, Aaron?
No, I think you hit it.
I think cybersecurity, it is not optional. It is an expectation from the SEC. It's our fiduciary duty to protect and safeguard that information. I think with the new Reg SP amendments coming out, we know from even that recent speech last week from the director of exams, there is going to be additional resources and publications from the SEC helping firms become familiar with what those amendments and what those rules will look like. And it's a lot about incident response, the timing and notification to clients if there was a cyber breach. So a lot of good resources coming out, and the SEC knows that it is part of your duty, your obligation. And I think just a little side story, we just recently talked to a firm and we talked a little bit about getting marketing team trained up. Some of their marketing on their website just alluded to the fact that they had cyber controls in place, or they were somehow had a nice program for security. They went through an exam, closed that exam up, and then immediately, maybe a month or two later, got an exam just cyber focused. If you're going to market yourself out there to be compliant and do anything in that space, you better make sure you can substantiate it. So I think just knowing what you're putting out there to the public, you better be able to substantiate it and protect what you're stating.
Well, and maybe one other thing about why this matters now is because it's going to be a lot easier for you to try and work on the alignment of your IT and your cybersecurity environments today ahead of an auditor coming in and finding something that you need to go fix. Some of the solutions are check the box, advanced, low-hanging fruit, not super complicated or super costly to implement, and some are not. Some of them are long-term projects that take quite a long time to implement, and you don't want to get called out on those and have somebody expect that you're going to do a fast turnaround solution on a 12-month project. So take the time to have the conversations today and think about whether or not you're in good alignment with where you need to be, and then plan out how you're going to remediate if you don't have an alignment right now so that you can have those things sorted and solved before somebody asks you the tough question at the table.
I think just one other little note, we talk about SEC and their expectations, knowing that the states all have their own rules as well. So NASA has a model rule on cybersecurity, and I know the state of Colorado was one of the first states to adopt that, where if you're in Colorado, you better have a cyber policy training in place for your employees, an incident response plan. So the states have I would say, more restrictions, and it's not out of line. It's not really that common, but I have seen an SEC registered firm get a call from the state examiners just because they're located in one state, or the jurisdiction is, the jurisdiction for each individual representative is the state that they're located at. So just be aware it's state or SEC rules.
I'll add another thought to that. As you know, you start getting more of the incident response that you have to file with the SEC. A lot of that is a good thing because it's going to drive additional controls to be put in place, right? So what's going to happen is people that have an incident have to report that to the SEC. They're going to sort of be the gatekeepers. So they're going to be getting incidents from, all over, US wide, right? So they're going to be the central point that can see what's happening in the industry, what are the attacks that are happening, and then they're going to be able to help disseminate that information for future controls. So it's a good thing.
I'm really curious, Nancy, you've already sort of sprinkled in some of the things that you're seeing, but if you could dive a little bit more into where this impacts the RIA firms the most, that'd be great.
Yeah, what we're seeing. I think when we do go into a firm and we're asking some of those upfront questions, when it leaks into, all right, let's assess some of your IT setup. And I think maybe Aaron can kind of talk a little bit about what we're seeing now. But well, we don't have a policy, or we, an advisor has just left the firm and there were no controls in place to help shut down and then control what he took or what she took. And so, you know, that's another risk area, right? How can we safeguard that information when you don't have protocols in place when someone leaves the firm? I think just knowing, I think it's set it and forget it, where you've maybe implemented something from the beginning. Maybe it was 10 years ago. You set up your firm, you've got a policy, and it's accumulating dust and hasn't been touched since. So as we've talked, a lot has changed over the last 25 years. A lot has changed since COVID. A lot has changed even this year with AI. So just making sure policies and procedures are touched more frequently, at least on an annual basis. Aaron, do you want to add on some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I could probably spend a lot of time on that slide in particular. I think we see a lot of patterns repeating. One is having internal IT teams that do not have experience or expertise in aligning IT infrastructure with the regulatory requirements. Not having good communication between compliance and IT is a critical challenge, especially when you have IT people who may not have that experience because they don't know what they need to go try and tune on the infrastructure side to make sure your firm is aligned with the regulatory responsibilities you have. That could also extend or apply to an outsourced IT provider, particularly if that outsourced provider is not fluent or keenly focused in how to align your the infrastructure they're providing to your business with those regulatory responsibilities. We see this commonly with service providers that service dentist's office, donut shops, auto repair facilities, and also an FMO or an RIA. And that can create some challenges just in how they operate their business where you may not be getting the service that you specifically need, which is kind of tailor-made or specifically focused to checking the boxes on the compliance side of things. Those are all challenges that we see happening pretty regularly. Nancy kind of nailed the lack of policies, particularly around cybersecurity. We're seeing businesses try to apply for cybersecurity insurance these days and not being able to hit that threshold either, which can sometimes be higher than the regulatory responsibility or have different things being asked or included in their requirements that we're not necessarily seeing yet from the SEC or states. So we've got challenges that are happening all over the place. But if I had to distill that into one central theme, it would just be lack of understanding about what the requirements are. Like, what are the rules of operation here from if I were an advisor trying to run a business, how do I know what I need to be doing and where do I start? I think not asking those questions or having somebody help, provide some insight into what that looks like early on can really create some challenges, especially as you start to grow and scale.
I really love that attitude as well, Aaron, that you're talking about really how do I do the best that I can with the resources that I have available versus what's the bare minimum that I need to get done here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really can feel overwhelming, right? And oftentimes some of the clients I work with, they don't start because they just are overwhelmed and they keep putting it off. And, I encourage just do something, right? Just start and it's going to get easier, right? You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have, a 75-page document, right? You really want to have a policy that is representative of the controls that you have in place and vice versa, right? It's one thing to have a policy, but if you're not following it and you're not doing what the policy says, that's probably even worse in the long run, right? You want to make sure that your written cybersecurity policies are really driving what your IT practices are, right? And so just start somewhere, and you don't have to get, to the end of the road, overnight. It's cybersecurity really is a journey. It's not a destination. You're really never going to arrive. It's always going to morph and change. And you've always got to adjust those levers and, put this button in place. And, it's constantly something that you want to pay attention to, like we've talked about so far. Regular review, adjustment where necessary. If you do have an incident, right, then you use that incident as a lessons learned, right? What can we do better, right? Because incidents are going to happen to everyone, right? It's not an if, but a when. And you want to use those as a learning ability to go in and make sure it doesn't happen again, what was lacking here. So those are always, a good way to adjust what your gaps might be. Just simply, when was the last time that you reviewed your written policy? Do your employees know the policy, right? Do they know what to do if, they see something on their computer that's not right? Do they know who to reach out to, right? So those are really the things. You need to have both the policies and the actuality. It's not like just one thing. It's not just having that piece of paper, right? I think Aaron said in one of our meetings, it could just be words on a paper, right? Until you're applying it and until you're actually living it.
I think that's such a great point too, Tammy. Something that I see, if you'll go back really quickly for me, is there a policy, and are the internal employees aware and following that policy? Or is it, oh, that's strange, I'm just going to delete this very, foreboding email in my inbox? I think that's really something that you have to sit down and ask yourself. Maybe I have this paper in the cabinet, but is this really what my team is following day in and day out?
Well, and I've sat in on SEC exams with some of our clients, especially during COVID when everything was remote. Fun way to spend 3 or 4 hours. And they will actually go through your written cybersecurity policy, and they will sort of quiz you. They will ask you, they'll say, your policy says this. Please show me, the evidence to support that, right? So if you've got it written down, you better be following it.
I think just to add on to that compliance, just the attestation. So if you are working with your team or your staff, you're training, you're making them aware that there's a policy, and then ensuring that there's an attestation that they have received or they've attended that training. I think that comes into play. We did go through this, we covered it, you were aware, and making that at least an annual practice. I think that's key. Oftentimes we lack the documentation for that. And then you noted sitting in on SEC exams, there is a department in DC that is just focused on IT. They know way more about IT than I would ever know, but that's what their main focus. And you're going to get some difficult and more focused exams if you were to prompt extra risk and be punted to the DC team.
And maybe one last thought that I would add to this too would just be that the policy does not protect your firm. It is not a guarantee of safety or security. So while there is a compliance component to this, there's also just a functional operational piece to cybersecurity. Is your cybersecurity going to legitimately do something to effectively reduce your risk from a cybersecurity perspective in general? And so you want alignment there. You want it to do both, right? And I think one thing we've also seen recently is some clients who have invested resources in best of breed solutions, but then not actually implemented those solutions to do what they're good at. And so there's a false sense of safety and security that sits behind the policy that says, yeah, we do this, and maybe even an auditor saying, yeah, you do this. But then the reality is the nerd knobs in that tool are not adjusted to actually do the thing that it is designed to do really well. And that is super disappointing as a technologist when you see that happening. Somebody has, the best intention and has invested their resources, but the outcome is not going to match the expectation and the input of those resources. So that's where you want to also make sure you've got somebody who's qualified to help you validate that the systems you are investing in and building for your business are operationally effective at completing the mission that they're there to do.
So I'm sure this slide we could go on for a long time, but let's talk the most common security gaps that we're seeing, not just policy, but really boots on the ground, what we're looking at in these policies and in these firms.
Sure, I can start right at the top of the list. There's a lot of conversation these days about what is the right way to protect devices, and we've got a lot of advisors and firms that we see that have a mix, like most businesses, of mobile devices like these things and laptops and people using home computers. We've got firms that have non-employee relationships within the folks that they do business with that may be using their own personal devices to access corporate resources and corporate data. And I think one of the biggest things that we see over and over is just making sure that all of those devices, whether they're mobile or laptop or company owned or BYOD, that there is the right level of protection and control around our corporate resources, our corporate assets. And typically that comes in the form of some sort of device management. And device management looks like different things to different devices. A lot of people are familiar with the concept of mobile device management for cell phones. That's kind of a thing that's been around a long time, where your company puts a bunch of software on your device and then they have the ability to see things on it or do things with the data that live on that phone. We've evolved now where we're at in 2025, where we can do more things to protect mobile data on mobile cell phones and tablets and things like that without having to have really intrusive controls. So that's good news, and that's actually a great way to help actually include BYOD or bring your own device types of deployments into the mix without necessarily have to invest a ton of corporate cash or resources to go buy laptops or buy corporate cell phones and issue them to people all over the place. We can still control that data using different software tools and techniques now in 2025 and beyond that make that an easier conversation from an IT perspective than it was even 3 or 4 years ago. But at the end of the day, we have to have control of those devices and of that data in some way. And it's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we have seen, especially recently with some of the clients that we've been working with, where there's just a proliferation of devices and data all over the
Aaron, I
place.
think we lost your audio. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear
No.
Aaron.
Yes.
You
I
can
hear
hear
him.
Aaron? Oh, it might be me.
Okay. Well, anyway, we want to make sure that we've got all the data under control. We want to make sure that we have the appropriate supervision and tools on these devices. There's lots of good ways that we can do that. But just handing someone a laptop without any of those controls on it and saying, good luck, is the fast track to some trouble. So we would strongly encourage you guys, if you don't have good controls on those types of devices, or you have people, this is a common one, take their personal cell phone and connect to your corporate email platform using whatever tool they want to, without your ability to wipe that data should they leave the firm or should you need to take that data off their cell phone. If you don't have those kinds of controls in place, you need to get on top of that right away.
Yeah,
What am
and
I
I would
missing?
add really having an inventory of devices that are accessing, that data, because you can't manage what you don't know about, right? So you really need to be aware of what people are using so you can secure it properly.
Yeah, all of those items, the device inventory, audit log, all part of an SEC exam request list that I've seen.
Yeah, and the audit log collection, I mean, that can be your friend, right? If you have an incident, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the logs. And those logs may tell us that nothing was exfiltrated, nothing was taken, nothing left the network, right? So that may actually be a help in that, in reporting and those kinds of things. And it also may tell us what exactly was taken. So having that before you need it is really critical, because if it's not on and you have an incident, the data just isn't there.
Yeah, the forensic fingerprints are critical for a lot of different reasons. They help us from just a behavior analytics perspective, evaluate when there are threats occurring in real time against your environment and against your data. You know, are people logging in and doing things that you wouldn't expect them to do? Is data being exfiltrated? We can even predict when people may be preparing to leave your firm because they're looking for another job based on data analytics. And all this is really comes back to the logs and the data that these platforms are storing about usage and access. There are some regulatory requirements to make sure that this data is preserved and retained for longer periods of time than is typically the default behavior for many of these platforms. And so without some very specific intention to go in and kind of reconfigure how these platforms keep this audit log data, you may actually be both missing out on important and helpful data, but you may also not be in alignment with some of your responsibilities for retaining that data from just a data access and books and records perspective.
Do you hear us now?
Yes, sorry.
Good.
I don't know what's going on with my internet today. Nancy, you mentioned something at the very beginning of our presentation about being proactive versus reactive, and I think that resonates with a lot of us on a variety of different topics. Let's talk a little bit about client vulnerabilities, maybe a little bit about education, how that all can wrap into what we're trying to protect.
Yeah, True West, we are constantly educating our clients and turning around just one pagers to help CCOs then educate their advisors, specifically on maybe things that we've seen across other firms. So lots of phishing attempts, and you'll see similar ones, and you know we've all seen them. FINRA or the SEC comes out with a confiscated email or some sort of phishing email that looks and feels like a SEC. So I immediately get like 20 emails from CCOs. Is this real? Is this real? And no, I think those have all happened to one of us. But education and just making sure that you just kind of talk to our clients. I think talking to the retail clients, the clients of our RIAs, and educating them as well. A lot of times some of those emails might come from our clients and we're click happy. And so click, and they look and open attachments that probably shouldn't be open in the first place. So do we have any protocols, or maybe Aaron can kind of touch on what tools that we can add for scanning attachments and proactiveness there. But I think knowing that we're working with our advisors during the annual trainings, and then in addition, having cyber training or cybersecurity trainings from in various quarters, and knowing that that is an expectation from the SEC. They'll want to see what sort of training you're offering to your employees. And Aaron, do you want to talk a little bit about just what we've seen in terms of some of our recent cases and where training might have been best used?
Yeah, sure. You mentioned it actually a little bit earlier. The rise of ChatGPT and other AI platforms these days is only increasing the level of complication and complexity, and the challenge that employees and all of us have about discerning what is safe and what is unsafe from just an email and phishing perspective. There is the minimum amount that you have to do to say you run a security awareness program. And then there's what probably both Tammy and I would say is the higher bar of what you should actually be doing to make sure you're keeping your employees prepared and armed with the information to make good decisions when they do get those interesting emails in their mailbox. I think I would encourage all of you certainly to make cybersecurity part of your company culture. That's having conversations all the time, frequently, and testing as rigorously as you can your employees to make sure that they are up to speed on all the most recent types of threats that could potentially land in their mailbox from a phishing perspective. There's also all sorts of other social engineering tricks, including SMS messages, things that are happening with LinkedIn profiles, and many different vectors of attack that could happen that you probably will also want to talk to your employees about as you think about just a general cybersecurity training kind of campaign for your business. But at the end of the day, it's having that security awareness program in place for your business to protect yourself, protect your employees. And it's not about trying to trick people. I hear that a lot. Oh, you're just trying to trick me into clicking something. And if we're doing it in the context of training, the answer I would say is yeah. Heck yeah, we're trying to trick you. I want to give you the closest approximation of a real world phishing attack as possible so that when the moment comes and you are hovering that mouse over something that maybe you shouldn't click, that you use the mantra that I've always said, which is when in doubt, throw it out. Just delete it and get rid of it rather than open up the potential avenue for real risk and threat to the business. So what last thoughts do you have on that topic, Tammy?
Yeah, I was waiting to jump in here. I always tell people to really just trust your instinct, trust your gut, right? If you have to ask, if you're thinking of forwarding that email, to Nancy saying, hey, is this real? Then, don't do that. Don't forward it around, first of all. Like Aaron said, just delete it. But, your internal triggers are already telling you something is off about that email, right? So trust that instinct. Trust but verify. You know your clients best. And if something comes in and it's not quite the right tone, or it just seems a little off, or you're not expecting that type of, communication from them, reach out on a known good number, do a little investigation, do a little digging, right? Don't just reply to it, because it could be if someone's in their email and you reply saying, hey, is this real? If there's someone in that account, they can just reply and say, yeah, it's intended for you. Go ahead and click on it. So just be smart about slowing down, getting a second opinion, things like that. I think that really is gonna serve you well. And trust your instinct, because those little triggers are gonna go off, and listen to them, because they're picking up on nuances in those emails that just are off a little bit.
So maybe one last vulnerability that I thought of is just your third-party vendors, and just ensuring that you're working with reputable firms and that they have cyber controls in place. And there's an expectation from the SEC that you are doing due diligence on your third-party providers. Who are you working with? What happens if they get breached? What happens to my client data? And so there's an expectation. And we're working with our firms. I believe it's in August when we do kind of just our whole assessment. Here's the list of vendors we're working with. What's the risk rating? Do we have any issues? Should we look to do any changes?
No, from my perspective, every time I receive a due diligence questionnaire for an onboarding client, I cheer a little bit that we've got someone with a good habit. But one thing I like to see if we back out of this a little bit is the true domino effect that this can have, right? If you have a strong bottom layer, for lack of a better word, your employees, your vendors, the different third parties that touch your business, if their employees are all well educated on cybersecurity, that shores up vulnerabilities that could affect you, that could affect your clients, that could affect your custodian, right? We're really trying to protect not just your firm, but also the whole ecosystem that you're a part of. So whether your firm is truly an RIA firm, or your firm is an MSP like Visory, and we're trying to protect ourselves to protect our clients, I think the easiest way to keep cybersecurity hygiene is wash your hands every day, right? Make sure your employees are trained to not click that fishy email and potentially send ripple effects across that whole ecosystem.
Great.
All right, so the big question is, how do you stay compliant? After all, we've talked about how important it is, but what do we need to do? Oops. I think we went one too far.
I think I'll just start off in saying having those active conversations with compliance in your IT department, making sure everybody knows what policies are in place and what your policy states, and is it being implemented in practice across your firm. So I think just key from my takeaway is just having those active, proactive conversations and review.
Yeah, and I would add to Nancy's and just say, as you're having those conversations, make sure you've got the right people engaged. Make sure you have people that understand their respective responsibilities and are experts in their field, so that they can speak to the potential things that need to be addressed. Be open-minded. You know, it's possible, especially if you hire someone, to spend a little bit of time doing some probing of maybe where you're at today and providing some insight into what potential challenges you might have. Be open to suggestions and for improvement. And don't necessarily be closed-minded and think you've got it on lockdown today, because there's too much stuff here. There's too many variables and too many moving parts, and it's constantly changing and evolving. If you had somebody that you spent a bunch of money to help you get something solved today, and it's been 2 years later, it's probably needs to be looked at again. That's how fast things are changing right now. And maybe even a year later, it could potentially need to be looked at again. So just have an open mind and keep the conversation going all the time. It's got to be a constantly evolving discussion that you're coming back to the table and saying, okay, how am I today?
And if you don't know what questions to ask, because a lot of times we get that, we don't know what we don't know when it comes to compliance. We just provide a simple 15-item, 20-item risk assessment, and it'll just kind of tell you what's your pulse. Are you really, we need, it's a red alert. We've got a lot to attend to, or we're moderately okay when it comes to the assessment of our program, or we have things buttoned up. We're in good shape. So that might be something to just look into if you just don't know what to ask.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say, once you do your assessment, you take the time, have a roadmap, put together a roadmap for yourself and for your business, just to address those gaps, right? Like we've mentioned earlier, they don't have to be done overnight, but give yourself a good, where am I going? What am I doing in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And that will help you get there.
Absolutely.
So I know this could again take a lot of our attention, and we're having a great problem, which is we're running up on the end of time. All of us could talk about this topic for a long time, but really quickly, let's talk SEC cybersecurity and those common compliance gaps.
Jump in here. I think the SEC Cybersecurity Rule, it hasn't been finalized, but there's, again, state rules that we all need to be aware of, and what's an expectation just on running your compliance program. So just having that risk assessment, we run a risk assessment all throughout the year, and we just do different focus areas with our clients, October being a month of cybersecurity focus. So proactively having that instant report, a lot of times folks will call and say, okay, we had a breach, what do we do? I'm like, well, you have a plan. No, we don't. Okay, so let's go and engage somebody. So we need to put a plan in place, but there is an expectation that you have that plan in place. And so knowing and understanding what that looks like, even doing just a little mock breach, you're just going to trial that internally and just do a dry run at your instant reporting to see if it works and needs to be revised. We've talked a lot about just compliance gaps, your policies and procedures, and do they actually articulate what you're doing in practice? And then do you have a way to oversee your devices and oversee what your employees are doing, and just that proactive training and training of the particular policies and procedures that you have in place? Are the employees aware of what they have an expectation based on your specific policies? So, Aaron, anything else to add there?
No, not really. I think you got it.
So this is one I know Tammy and I could speak to very heavily, but let's talk about how you're using and utilizing your managed IT security partnership.
Yeah, so, really traditional IT, kind of tends to focus on the basics and, tends to be more reactive in nature. We've talked a lot today about, partnering with an MSP or an IT vendor who really knows, the compliance that RIAs need to adhere to. And as those compliance regulations become more and more complicated, right? You really need to make sure that your IT partner understands those so they can put the proper controls and turn those what did you call them? Geek knobs up.
I love
Yeah,
Aaron's term, nerd knobs.
Yeah. So, you just have to get those right. And, those cyber threats are becoming, much more sophisticated. And so, you really need more than just IT support, right? You really need a partner who understands the space and can really work with you on that proactive defense, right, of your operations. And that's going to help to improve your cybersecurity posture, your compliance. And at the same time, they can help you align your business goals with your IT and really help you to get there. I think too often, we just assume that compliance, stops at the written policies, and that's really, not the case anymore. We really need to upgrade both that mindset and the infrastructure to align IT and help you get there much more securely.
So a little bit about where we come into play as Visory. Nancy, Aaron, you guys have been absolutely wonderful, and we've really enjoyed having you on this webinar today. But talking about going off of what Tammy was saying, truly a managed IT partner, we want to step in as someone that's more than a break fix partner, right? Our printer is broken, call Visory, right? We are really trying to have eyes on glass at all times for things like threat hunting. We want to be the ones that submit the ticket for you. Hey, we noticed this computer didn't patch overnight. Can we talk to that employee and make sure it's updated? Everything from that true partnership of managed IT to things like mobile device management. We spoke about how important it is to have your devices protected. Everybody has a smartphone. What was it? 9 out of 10 folks nowadays. So how are you protecting that vulnerability in your business? Geofencing, conditional access, easy offboarding, all of those items that you don't think about until you truly need. Visory is trying to be that partner that steps into that gap, if you will, and takes that off your plate for you. Being that we are RIA focused, that's the vertical I talk to day in and day out, right? So we understand the threats that you guys are up against. Unfortunately, a little bit heavier than your average coffee shop down the street. That's a good thing, though. That means you guys are all doing great, but we're really working to implement things like AI-driven threat protection as well. Threat detection as well. That way we can really stay ahead of these trends and be a true partner that's the one reaching out to you versus you having to call us and say, hey, this email looks weird and 8 people have gotten it this morning. What's going on? Having eyes on glass and having a partner that is aware of the updates, even in compliance and governance, I think is so, so important. It was truly a pleasure to have you guys on today, Nancy and Aaron. We went ahead and put your contact information up here. Any last words or thoughts for you guys this morning or this afternoon?
Thank you for including us today, and we've enjoyed working with you all, preparing for this. And if anyone is interested in just an initial assessment or a review and how we can partner up with Visory, let us know. We'd love to help.
Yep, thank you for having us. We know IT is everyone's favorite topic, so glad to be here to talk about it with everyone.
Right. I don't think we put anybody to sleep today. Oh, fabulous. And my glamour shot as well for any cybersecurity consultation. If you guys are looking for a new firm to partner with you, please feel free to give me a call. That's my email and our website, of course. We're really passionate about not just providing services, but hosting webinars such as these to help educate our base just as much as stand beside them. So really grateful for your guys' time today. I know we had one question we couldn't quite get to about cybersecurity insurance. Byron, if you are on, feel free to email myself or Nancy and Aaron. We'll be happy to answer that again. But thank you guys all for staying the full hour. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Claudia.
Bye-bye.
Tammy.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.